This is Less Than 60 Miles by Thin Red Line Games, as you can see there. It's set in 1985. It's a sort of operational look at the classic what happens if the Warsaw Pact invades Western Europe. This one looking at specifically the Fulda Gap and the area held by the US Fifth Corps. I said I'd look at this. I've been looking forward to this game, and it was a kind of follow-up to Next War India Pakistan that I've just played, because I was interested in how the different games would portray this sort of modern-ish type of combat in very different ways operationally based on the timescales. So Next War India Pakistan is 2 turns to the week, a turn every 3.5 days or so, 3 to 3.5 days. This has a turn every 3 hours. Every 3 hours is a turn, so you can see the turn track has days 0, 1, 2, 3 and day plus 4. And then you have the turn track of hour 0, hour 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21 and so on. And I've got it set up here. This is the first scenario, called something like the 11th Hour, and it's a 5-turn game where a couple of Warsaw Pact, what are they? Are they regiments? I don't know. A couple of sets of Warsaw Pact units. Oh, I'll look them up. I think they're probably rifle infantry regiments or something like that. They might be. Let's have a look in the scenario book. Warsaw Pact set up. Oh no, that's the campaign. Foolish. Scenario 1, the 11th Hour. Okay, motorised rifle divisions. There we go. There's 2 motorised rifle divisions there, SU-27G and 39G, part of the 8th Guards Army, plus some other assets, some artillery, some helicopters, some missile launch stuff, some more general artillery. And they're trying to push forward into West Germany across the border here. So when you start looking at a game every 3 hours, what you get in this game is a game where every unit has to have orders, and there's a chain of command that is required for them to change their orders, and when they try and change their orders, you measure how many turns it's going to take them to try and change their orders. They don't have to roll to do it, but it's just going to take time. And so there's an element in the game about trying to keep your units in the best orders for the situation, while your enemies are in very poor orders for their situation. And in that respect, it has a lot in common with some tactical games I've played, like the Musket and Pike series by GMT, which is exactly that kind of chaotic, trying to have your units in the best possible orders for the situation, and being unable to change them, in that case because of a die roll rather than a time delay, but it accomplishes the same kind of thing. And in, say, Tenkatsu by Hexasim, you've got that same kind of thing where you've got clans trying to change orders. That is affected by time. There's a time delay if they're too distant from the headquarters or the clan, you know, the chief, main clan, the army leader, whatever it is. And then there's also a randomized ability to change from certain orders into certain other orders. Here you've just got the time delay, but it is also modified by, you know, being out of command, but trying to change into orders in formation independently of your command structure. I think being engaged and things like that. So as you can see, all the units have got a marker like this that's telling you what formation it's in this case road, and it's telling you what movement type you're using. They're using column. It tells you how badly you're affected if you're caught in combat. In this case, very badly, +4 to the attacker, that's really unpleasant, and so on. There are other things on there that we won't go into. I think there's a bombardment modifier if you're barraged or whatever, and there's something else. So all the units pretty much have got will have these kind of markers on them. I may use 2 for a single unit if that's easier for shorthand. See, you've got a unit in recon, they're in tactical movement, they're -2 in combat, +3 minus. I'd have to look up what these mean again. I know that's the combat modifier. I think these might be another combat modifier as a defender or an attacker, and a bombardment modifier, but I'd have to check that. But anyway, you can see if they don't have a marker, then they're considered to be in a tactical formation, which is your default. And so we've started off trying to push. I've just done the first half of the turn, which has been the Warsaw Pact move, and it's been very difficult because, or quite time consuming, because I'm completely unfamiliar with the system, and it's a very detailed and intricate system, and you're trying to work out whether you're going to be in supply and in command range. And the movement points that you get are 12 for every unit, and you'd think that would make it easy, but actually this rating determines how many movement points all the different types of terrain cost, and a lot of hexes have 2 terrain costs, one for the terrain and one for any obstacles in it. You're paying different terrain costs if you're trying to use road movement, but that's modified by special rules in this case. Because of civilian panic, which is clogging the roads up. There's a +4 movement point cost for crossing over this yellow dotted line, unless you do so by a couple of very specific hexes, one of which is out of play in this game. These blue things are marking the edges of the board. We're playing in this central area across the map there, over to the blue markers over there, so a thin strip across the middle of the map. And so this initial push by the Warsaw Pact is very slow, slowed down by a combination of those factors. And then you have to factor in if opposing units are in a screening posture, then they, like that, then they are also adding movement points as units advance up to them, so they're increasing the movement point cost of the area around them because they're screening. So very much more granular look at movement and terrain than you're getting in the Next War series. You'll also see markers like these. You have to have delineated predetermined your areas where you can fly basically close air support missions with your aircraft, which are handled just with air points on a set of tracks over here, much like the basic game of Next War series. But you have to have put those markers down to show where you want to fly potential air missions. In order to change anything, the orders that your units have, the formations that they're in, where your air markers are, or anything else, you need to spend command points. As you can see, NATO only have 1 command point, and so have very limited opportunities to react here. But the Warsaw Pact only have 2 command points a turn, which isn't enough to go doing much. So there we have it. I'm just getting started on this. As I say, it's proving quite challenging to play, simply because of the number of things that you have to be keeping in mind, and the systems are unfamiliar, and the supply rules are unfamiliar, the command chains are unfamiliar, the formations are unfamiliar, the movement point and terrain cost is detailed and requires lots of, very simple but lots of adding basically to track multiple movement point costs for each hex that you're moving into, or hex side crossing a bridge, plus the traffic, plus blah 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 blah. And you can also have movement point costs added on road movement for the presence of other of your units on the roads also trying to use it. So you know it is properly detailed in terms of the movement cost modelling. I'm sure when I get to combat that's going to be equally detailed. It does look a lot like the kind of thing though where we have a combat differential and we're going to throw in lots of air support points and helicopter support points and artillery support points to get a load of modifiers. So a similar kind of idea to Next War, but a lot more granular in terms of the outcomes, because we have these sort of attrition points. I can't remember what they're called in this, but we have these basic step loss attrition point kind of things that we're going to add to units as they fight. But they can also, you know, accumulate them just for sort of forced marching or trying to force their way across rivers, and all kinds of other things can add to them. So they're a bit more than just combat losses. They're general fatigue and attrition and wear and loss of equipment and all kinds of stuff like that, all rolled into this attrition system, which uses these kind of dog tag markers here. There are an awful lot of markers in this game, by the way. You can see some of them there, and I haven't punched everything. And I keep finding things that I need that I haven't punched and clipped yet, which is frustrating. Slightly annoyingly, bridging in this game is really quite important, as you can imagine, in modern warfare, and although bridges can be mined and blown up, and in fact the NATO player starts with 4 of the bridges of their choice mined and have blown up 3 of them the moment the Warsaw Pact started to move. There weren't any, I couldn't find encounters for that, so I've gone rummaging around in Next War India Pakistan, which helpfully had some excellent bridge destroyed sort of hex side markers like this, and you can see those bridges have gone, but the bridge here that the NATO had mined failed to detonate, and so there's something of a gap across the Fulda River there. On the downside, on one hand, you'd think, well, maybe the NATO player shouldn't have signalled that and should have waited until the Warsaw Pact get right up close before making their roll, so that they're in the dark as to what's going to happen. And there is that element, but on the other hand, there's also the element that if it goes wrong and it doesn't go off, you've left the bridge open and you've let the enemy get right up close. So here we, as the NATO player, at least know whether what we've got to do, and we could try and allocate some engineers out of, you know, 5th Corps HQ here, or the 11th whatever 11th Cav, something like that, 11C HQ here. We could try and allocate some engineers into remining this bridge potentially. The thing about the problem with that is that I'm going to want those engineers to do other things, such as, after this artillery unit has moved up in support in road, we're going to have to give him, we're going to want to give him an order that says, all right, now switch into something more appropriate for defending the river line, which isn't going to be road movement. So we're going to need an order for that, and we've only got one command point. So right away there, you're sort of illustrating how you're going to have more to do, or more that you want to do than you're capable of achieving with your command points. And from that point of view, it's looking like a very interesting system, albeit a very granular and right at the tactical end of the sort of operational spectrum. Looking really interesting, and I'll come back with more as this develops. So with so few NATO units on the board, the NATO turn will probably be quite quick, but before I get stuck into that, just a couple of corrections or amendments or whatever on these markers. I looked these up, so that's your movement type that you're using, column. This is your bombardment modifier, pluses is bad. This is your attack modifier. That means obviously you can't attack out of road column, and this is your defensive combat modifier. So that's your attacking. If you're attacking, that's your combat modifier, and that's if you're defending, that's your combat modifier. And pluses again are bad. That's good for the attacker. So being in road makes you very susceptible to artillery, barrages, and being attacked, which makes a lot of sense. So there's that. Another thing I found out was that spending engineer points to mine bridges doesn't cost command points. So the NATO or the US, let's call them NATO, but it's really the US, I think, that's being represented here, were able to drop an engineer down here and put a mine bridge marker down, which will come into effect, and we've got a time marker under here, hour 12. So it's 6 o'clock at the moment. In 2 turns time at midday, that bridge will be mined again, and we'll get our engineer point back, assuming that NATO, the Warsaw Pact, don't get there and stop us from doing that, because we've got no friendly units around to defend those engineers. So if were a Warsaw Pact unit to get adjacent, that engineer would simply be gone and the bridge wouldn't be mined, and it would all be to no avail. But we would get the engineer point back, so we might as well try, because it costs no command points. What that meant was that of our command points, we have 1 command point this turn. We had a couple of things to think about. One was getting this artillery out of its road into a defensive posture, but we need it to move first, so we can't do that this turn. So then we thought, well, what else can we spend our command point on? And what we're going to spend it on, one thing we can, is some aerial reconnaissance. So we can spend a command point and then some air points and send some air power over to try and recon and see if we can get some intel on some Warsaw Pact movements. And if we can do that, our plan then is to use this battalion of this 333rd Battalion of missile artillery, self-propelled rocket missile artillery, with its 16 range in the middle there, and its 4 barrage strength. And we are going to try and drop some very unpleasant missiles onto whatever we can spot with our air. So we're going to pick this hex here, and we are going to drop, we're going to have a recon attempt on that hex, and we have to choose a number of air points. Now, I haven't looked at the table for recovering air points, but I'm going to assume that we can get them back pretty easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 3 air points, which is the maximum allowed. So we'll move our current air down to 1. Our max air stays up there at 4. And we're going to spend 3 air points on this reconnaissance attempt. And I'll try and find the correct table here in this booklet of tables, and it's this one here. It's this intelligence table, and what we're going to roll on, that says electronic warfare points. I don't think they're quite close enough to try with electronic warfare, so we're going to try, but air points count double strength, so we're on the 6th column because we've used 3 air points, and we're going to roll a d10 down here, and let's roll the white dice here, and we get a 4. So if we cross-reference our 6 plus with a 4, that shows us that we get a +1. So that means that we have an intel +1 marker, so we know a little bit about what's going on around there. Intel ranges from 1 to 0 to 4. 0 means you know nothing, and 4 means you have a very good idea of what's happening. And we've got this Intel +1 marker in here. Putting that on the unit, you lose all depth perception watching it through the camera while your hand's trying to do something different. It's really quite a strange sensation. Aha, right. So what that then means is that if we wanted to then launch a bombardment attempt against those guys, it would be based on our intel. So let me try and show that table. So here we are. Here's the bombardment table, and we can see here the sort of combat support point allocation up there, based on air power or artillery factors or whatever. And then here you can see you use a column based on the detection level, which is that intel. So we'd be on the first column here, and I'd have to see how this worked a little bit better. Okay, so the modified die roll, so we'd be on this one here, and the modified die roll is down here, and then we read across to see what we get. And with 4 factors, the best we could do if we rolled a 9 or 10 would be the target would be half engaged on an 8, 9 or 10, and the right number, it would only be afflicted on a support unit. So we couldn't actually inflict anything at all, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think we can inflict anything at all. Looking at this, we're in this bit of the table here to cause any casualties, and the right hand column only applies to support units, and it's so we could try and hit the artillery, I suppose. We were hoping to hit a combat unit, and I don't want to spend the attrition points on my rockets on such a poor shot. I was hoping to get up to a higher detection level, but I think we're going to hold back off on the shot here, because it doesn't seem like we can have much effect given how poor the aerial reconnaissance was. So we're going to leave it there and just push on through the NATO turn, which will be very quick because they've got very little to move. So not surprisingly, NATO didn't do a lot, because they're quite happy where they are. They've got a unit defending under here, a unit in here, HQ and a depot up there. They're mining this bridge here, and they've got a unit up here dug in, and their support behind them, and that's all they're trying to do is slow this advance down for a few turns, and we'll see where we're at. This is obviously just a learning exercise for me, just to see how things look. So start of turn 2, I rolled the weather. No rain, no fog, so nothing interesting or nothing out of the ordinary there. And I'm now going to roll for events. So another interesting little quirk that this game has is that both sides, there's the Russian deck and there's a NATO deck. Both sides get a deck of event cards. In this case, the Warsaw Pact have got 4 cards in their deck, selected out of quite a large selection, and you don't select them randomly. You pick. The scenario tells you what your events are. Then you shuffle them up, and you roll a dice at the start of each turn. And if you roll a 10, you take your top event card, and then you get to you have to play it that turn, or you lose it. So it's a use it or lose it kind of thing. But you get some weird stuff or some nice stuff. They're generally unfavourable to you, and gnaw at the enemy in some way. Like you can stop a unit in its tracks. You can make a unit forced to stop moving. You can have improvements on combat rolls or bombardment rolls or whatever. But obviously, it may turn out those events are no use to you in the turn that's happening, or it may turn out they are. So let's roll. I'll use the red dice for the Warsaw Pact and the white one for For NATO, and we're looking for 10s, and there's a 10 for the Warsaw Pact, so they have picked up their event card. Let's take the top card then. It is this, Central Front, Lucky Shot. Okay. A direct hit on a NATO command post kills everyone inside, disrupting the command chain. Played during any bombardment phase. The Warsaw Pact targets a NATO HQ within range of any artillery and with a detection value of at least 1 for the duration of the current action phase. Any subordinate unit that has a broken command chain and is considered out of command during ground combat. Alright, well let's see. Let's see whether we can make any use of that or not. It's going to be quite tricky too. I'm not sure how we're going to use that, but there it is. So I'm going to carry on with the sort of administration of this turn, racking up and adjusting air points and looking at orders and stuff, but I'm going to shut this down because we're into turn 2 and the video will be long enough.